Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Meet la Prensa. It's your host, Lyanne Alfaro, filling in for Pablo Manriquez today. Now, I'm here as host of Moneda Moves, but also part-time host of Meet la Prensa, a big fan. And today, I also have someone in the studio that I'm a big fan of, Brandon Gomez. He's an associate producer over at CNBC, New York University grad as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lyanne. It's super exciting to connect, to touch base. I know we've worked offline before, so now it's nice to talk on camera.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, for anyone who may be unfamiliar, can you start by walking us through a little bit about your career trajectory and what got you to CNBC?
Yeah, so my pathway to the newsroom, I always knew I wanted to be in the newsroom once I made that decision from high school. My career actually started working as an intern at a law firm when I was 17. I was very lucky to have that opportunity. And as I was working there, the lawyer realized what my real passion was in speaking with the clients, with the people that he was defending. And he said, it seems like you're more interested in the people side as opposed to the law, the litigation, the courtroom. So have you ever considered possibly journalism? You're really good at interviewing people. You're really good at depositions. And that's sort of what put me on this path for journalism. And before that, even when I was 5 years old, I actually did a kindergarten project where I interviewed my town mayor, which was, little 5-year-old Brandon sitting in a swivel chair, rocking back and forth and asking, did you always know you wanted to be mayor? And I think it's just sort of like, streamlined from there. And so to get to CNBC, it wasn't necessarily always the end goal. I knew that I wanted to work in news. I think I discovered a passion for business news on the beat, and that opportunity is one that I've welcomed.
Yeah, and another thing I think you've welcomed is certainly covering financial inclusion, diversity within this space, which is lacking, to say the least. But you've done an excellent job at bringing some of that coverage to CNBC, both via digital and on camera.
Yeah, I think we do always talk about this representation issue, right? It's if I don't see myself in the system, how can I ever see myself succeeding in the system? And I think that that's why the financial news beat has been something that I've come to hold near and dear to my heart, especially as you mentioned the work that I've done on the personal finance beat. It's not something that I grew up talking about. It's not something that I see a lot of people in the Latino community talking about at the dinner table, or in my experience, it was always about how to save or how to have money or how to make money, but not what to do with it once you had it. It was about covering everyday expenses. It wasn't about investing it for the future to create generational wealth. And even just keywords like that I can so quickly throw out, I feel like is something that is not in everybody's vernacular. And so in coming to CNBC, I've been really trying to shed light on those who are doing the work, both from the personal finance end, from the entrepreneurial end, from the consumer end, and really just sort of attacking this on all fronts to make sure that this is something that is coming up within the Latino community, within diverse communities where it wasn't prior.
When you think about the coverage that you're doing, who is your intended audience? Who do you want to see that coverage and see themselves represented?
I want to see somebody who is curious, right? Like somebody who maybe doesn't know what the right questions are to ask, but is aware of maybe where they want to get, and is just trying to figure out what that pathway is, right? I feel like I come from this interesting position, especially right now in my career, where I'm also learning as I go. Like I said, I didn't grow up watching CNBC. I didn't, show up at CNBC, to be completely honest, knowing what an IPO was. I didn't know how to follow stocks and in the stock market and Wall Street and everything. So I feel like I see the beginning of my journey in a lot of the people that I talk to still. And I think that I'm on the journey with them, right? During quarantine, we're talking about stories about people that are paying off, credit card debt, people that are trying to figure out what to do with their student loans that are frozen. I'm right there with them. So I feel like in a way, it's almost like covering my peers, my community, but then also learning from those who are well beyond me. And then also, right, we lift as we climb. Those who are just starting their journey, those who are graduating, those who are even younger, just giving them access to resources. And like I said, that vocabulary that will ultimately help them succeed.
Yeah, Brandon, I can relate with that so much. It kind of feels like you're covering, it hits so much closer to home because you're covering yourself in a way, you're covering your peers. When you take a look at all the possible Latinx and business issues that we could be covering, what do you think are the 3 to 4 most important to be covering right now?
Yeah, I mean, I can sort of break it down, I guess, from what I already did, right? I think we're talking about consumers. Okay, so we're talking about not just that representing Latinos is something that's a social good or a moral obligation that companies are now doing in order to be morally in the right. I think that the language is now shifting to it actually being good for business. It's actually good for the bottom line to be inclusive, which I know for a lot of people, you might think, well, yes, obviously we've been here the whole time telling you that. But I see the work that you do and always talking about the $2.7 trillion GDP that Latinos represent. Like that inclusion is just bottom line good for business. So I just feel like that's a story that we are starting to see covered and starting to see the narrative shift from it being this moral conversation to, hey, this right down to the bottom of it is just good for business. I think another story that people, are just figuring out is that investor side is, where are Latinos putting their money? What are Latinos supporting? What sort of like draws that Latino dollar? And I know that there are so many people that are doing work to also figure that out as, I want to call it that like 201 level conversation that, okay, now that I've saved money, now that I've earned money, now that I know, now that I've paid off my credit card debt, right? Let's tick through all the personal finance buckets that I've gone through recently. Paid off the credit card debt, rebuilt the safety net, and now I'm getting ready to invest. So like, what am I going to do with that investing and with that money? And right now, there's just so many rich avenues for people to invest, whether it be through some of these apps that we're constantly hearing about, Robinhood, whether it's the rise of the retail investor, again, keywords. But I think that Latinos are a really integral part of that conversation. And I think that's something that we're seeing happen right now. And then just to give us a third one, right, like the entrepreneurial side of things, I think that the conversation there, at least from the angle that I've been having it recently, has really been about entrepreneurs gaining access to capital. And to double down on that, I think the question is, do Latinos actually want to find themselves with footwork within the system? It's known that Latinos are not receiving loans at the same rates as their white-owned business peers. Do they want to fight that? Do they want to stay in the system and say, listen, we deserve representation, we deserve this money? Or, and again, this is based on a conversation I had recently, do we want to figure out our own system? Do we want to go another route? And, which I have found to most recently be this, community crowdsourcing. Are Latinos going to go that route and find ways to build their businesses in that community spirit, which I think is, one, already so integral to the Latino experience, but then two is a new system, which we can then say, okay, well, this has a foundation in diversity and inclusion, as opposed to trying to bend or mold a system that already exists that has systemic issues. So I would say, yeah, I think those are, entrepreneur, consumer, investor, just all areas that it's like Fruit Ninja. You're just kind of trying to like tackle them as they go.
Metaphor, I'm here for it. But I think you pose a really interesting question in terms of just, will Latino entrepreneurs, which represent a huge deal of the new entrepreneurship that we're seeing in the US, right? We take a look at the last 10 years, the biggest group of entrepreneurs were the Latinos, were Latinx per Stanford studies. And you did cover this in a recent story where they are not getting that big chunk of capital funding that they need to really scale from those big banks. So you pose a really interesting question. Will they continue to try to push to integrate themselves into a system that we're kind of stitching different pieces together that don't really quite fit at the moment? We're working towards it, right? We're hearing some of that language, we're hearing some of that momentum, but it doesn't quite actually serve the Latinx population quite yet. or will they lean more into their communal efforts, community efforts, and crowdsourcing? I think that is a super important question, which kind of leads me to my next thing, Brandon, in terms of entrepreneurship. Where do these Latinx entrepreneurs stand in terms of their endeavors? How far have we been set back? Do we have any information on that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's an entrepreneurial spirit that is baked into the DNA, I think, of the Latino community. There's resiliency, perseverance, and I think all of that is what's needed to survive a pandemic, and that's what we've seen happen. Way back at the beginning of COVID and everything closing down, I had spoken to a group of Latino entrepreneurs, and also I would love to highlight the fact that it really is also Latina entrepreneurs who are driving small business growth as well, specifically, but unfortunately also seeing the largest number of closures. And again, that same report that you're referencing from Stanford saying the number one reason being limited cash on hand and limited sort of, what we would call liquidity to cover expenses. But to speak specifically to the entrepreneurs, what I'm finding is that there is this resiliency. There is this, okay, when we needed to shut our doors, right, and I'm talking about now a cafe that I covered in Dallas, we needed to figure out a way to still get everyone their morning cup of coffee. And so they built this online system for orders to come through. And so they actually built out a whole delivery platform, and they got themselves available on those platforms. That was something that I was told, was 4 years in the making and took 4 days to execute when absolutely necessary, right? Like, these are the entrepreneurs that we're speaking about. And I think of another, the Queer Gym that was based out in Oakland, California. When speaking with them, it was a matter of having to adapt to no longer having a brick and mortar location that members could show up to. So they completely pivoted, much like all of us, adopted this whole new Zoom lifestyle and started offering classes online, started doing targeted ads in, queer and LGBT cities like Chicago, like New York, like Boston, and actually saw their membership increase dramatically, right? So like, these are the innovations that are taking place within the Latino community, within Latino entrepreneurship, that I think is going to help sustain growth long term. Again, unfortunately, that statistic still exists, right? That I say that Latino businesses are closing at a shocking rate. However, Latino business in general is also growing at the fastest rate. So I think we sort of need to figure out where we're falling off and sort of plug those issues, plug those holes in the boat.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Brandon, I'm curious, in terms of your career trajectory, CNBC is a solid place to build a career, to be. What trajectory do you kind of see yourself as a reporter? Where do you see yourself in 5 to 6 years?
I love this because this is something that I have given a lot of thought to recently. I don't know if it was the performance review time. I don't know if it was, a year since the pandemic and everything feeling like it was freezing career-wise. But over the last year, there has been, growth. For me personally, I think I really did just learn the language, or be handed the language to understand what I want that to be. And I really do believe whatever that long-term plan is, it involves reporting on issues at the intersection of DEI and business. There's a reason why in journalism, one of the key principles and values we're constantly taught as journalists is follow the money. I think there's always a money angle to the story, and we talk about money being a means to an end, but it's also a very significant conversation starter. And when we're talking about sustainability of closing the gap, economic opportunity, and we've been using that word at CNBC a lot, not just access, but also opportunity, is really a part of it. So for me, I think 5 to 10 years, it's honestly just like doubling down on what's happening here, right? Like, I just got involved in the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force at CNBC on our reporting subcommittee, and overseeing a lot of the longer form projects that we've been doing there, our race and opportunity specials, whatever network, whatever publication ends up housing the content and the reporting that I want to do long term remains to be seen. But I know that up to this point, the experience that I've had has given me the language to say, you know what, 5 to 10 years, if I'm covering the business news beat at the intersection of diversity and inclusion, then I think I've married all of my passions. And I would also just share a tidbit that, my supervisor had given me as feedback, and he said, you know what, Brandon, you are most passionate, or you are most committed to the assignments that you are most passionate about. And he's like, and it just shows. And he's like, you're the kind of person that will deliver 100% on any assignment, but the ones that you're really passionate about, like I can see it. Like I can see it because you will just pour in the time. So I think long term, it's a matter of highlighting these narratives and having an intentional outcome, right? Not just covering these stories and giving them a spotlight and giving them, a pin in history, or saying, hey, this is happening and this is wrong, but also having an intentional outcome as the media, where we have a role in actually, creating change, creating conversations, making connections for change makers and change bringers.
No, I think that that's so super important to move with intention and to not just to kind of process things before you cover, before you tweet, before you do your journalistic duty. I think that that's super important. You mentioned earlier on that when you grew up, you weren't having these conversations about money necessarily, and I can definitely resonate with that because same. What is one of your biggest money learnings you've had thus far? This is definitely a Moneda Moves question I like to ask all my guests.
Yeah, I think honestly for me at this point is like stick to the plan. I think there are sometimes bad habits that often, might bubble up for me. And I think that, I've sort of like set out a plan, right? Pay down credit card debt. We'll get to student loans once, we all figure those out. I really have no idea what's happening with those in terms of being frozen. And yeah. And then, just like charting, like staying on course, right? Like figuring out how to curb bad habits. I think some of that was like using the credit card and spending it even though you don't have it. Or I think there was this sort of like growing up thinking, well, it's my brother's birthday. I want to get him something. I'm going to go a little bit like extravagant. Let me go a little bit, but like really knowing what it means to like stick to a budget. I think there's some merit to maintaining that as like my rule that I've sort of had to figure out how to navigate is, my own financial growth, but then also, I'm going to do the fruit ninja metaphor again, just like swatting away these sort of like bad habits that I grew up with.
Like when you interview someone, you can walk away with one like kind of like totem symbol, and I feel like for you it's going to be fruit ninja. So
it's going to be fruit ninja. It actually does work. It works super well. I'm trying to figure out a TikTok strategy as well, and I feel like that brand might actually sell there.
I think you should go for it. The money ninja, the money fruit ninja. There's something there. We gotta play with that a little bit. Brandon, thanks so much for joining us on Meet la Prensa and this Moneda Moves feature. For everyone watching, please go follow Brandon on B. Gomez Reports on Twitter and Brandon Gomez elsewhere. Follow his work on CNBC. He's doing awesome work at the intersection of Latinos and business. But again, thanks so much for joining us on this episode, and we'll see you on the next.